Hey, good afternoon, everyone. This is another Cirucci team brief here on June 24th, 2019. We got me, George, and Johnny here with us this afternoon. We got lots of interesting topics we want to delve into. Just right before we were going live, this was recently just brought to my attention. On all of our on my channel and Johnny's channel in the previous chats, there's been uh, irrefutable evidence been produced that the Jesuits are controlling Hollywood and quote pop culture can truly be called Pope culture. For instance, a Jesuit priest, fourth vow Jesuit priest Daniel A. Lord S.J. actually drafted the official Hollywood motion picture code. But just the Tom Clancy books, I wasn't aware. I never read them, but my dad has read the Tom Clancy books, so I saw them growing up on the bookshelf. But I played the Ghost Recon video games, which are very popular in the early 2000s. Tom Clancy has been very ingrained into pop or Pope culture. He's all over the place, but I just wasn't aware of how connected Tom Clancy was to the Jesuits and how Jesuit theater, like how the whole games are based on Jesuit theater with the main famous character Jack Ryan. But people aren't aware. Tom Clancy, you can see on his Wikipedia, there's a photo of him at the Jesuit Boston College Burns Library in 1989. Clancy went to Jesuit Loyola College. People aren't aware. He also went to Jesuit Loyola High School in Townsend, Maryland.
He's a good Eric. He's a good New England liberal. He died at 66 in 2013. He's a good New England liberal Catholic. And you mentioned a great point. His name has an empire, just like Lucasfilms, George Lucas, not just multi-million-dollar movies, but also a huge empire in video. People have no idea how much money is in video games. A tremendous amount of money in the video games. And
it's huge, billions and billions of dollars. People aren't
aware. Absolutely. And it all revolves around revolves around the Catholic Church, just like George was talking about before we went live. How it was admitted in the story that the hero of many of these stories, Jack Ryan, was recruited by a Jesuit priest into the CIA. It goes on, and we just talked about how Amazon streaming is going to take up the mantle of Clancy and put in John Krasinski, a guy who does not strike you from The Office. The lead characters from The Office does not necessarily strike me as a great fit for a CIA action hero, but hey, he's a good Catholic boy, right, George?
Well, okay. Now you mentioned John from The American Office, which is based on the British TV show starring Ricky Gervais. Ricky Gervais played Michael in England, and Steve Carell plays Michael in America. And something Johnny has mentioned before, in the American version, it takes place in Scranton, PA. And now Ricky Gervais, now I wasn't going to talk about him, but
well, George, Gervais, hang on, wait, George, you left everybody in suspense there. What's in Scranton, George? A ton of Catholic and another Catholic university that has a public name to it. The University of Scranton, just like the University of San Francisco and the University of Seattle, another Jesuit university with a public name to it.
Oh, there's also a Scranton Prep there also. So the Jesuits got two intelligence centers going on there in northern Pennsylvania.
Absolutely. And George, who's that? BJ Novak is Jewish. Doesn't he have Jesuit breadcrumbs around him? The guy that.
I'm sorry, who is that?
BJ Novak, who does the American version of The Office, also has a supporting role in it. I've got him. Hold on. I know he's Jewish, but interesting that he would revolve it. Steve Carell. I just forced myself to watch that stupid Get Smart. Both Steve Carell and Anne Hathaway in Get Smart, good Roman Catholics, and of course they have Dwayne the Rock Johnson in there that we suspect is heavily involved in the pedocracy.
Oh, with that movie, Johnny? How that movie is like very powerful Jesuit overtones with the chaos and control.
You bet.
That's basically that's the Hegelian dialectic of how the intelligence agencies operate. They create a chaotic situation like their incident like with 9/11, and then they control it afterwards. With the Jesuit trained professor, or the Georgetown professor Veit Din drafting the Patriot Act, for instance, and all the key CIA guys at the time. John Brennan, the deputy director, went to Fordham. George Tenet, the director, went to Georgetown, for instance. And you see kind of how like they work with the KGB also, and like the Chinese also on the other side, which is kind of shown in that movie how chaos and control are all working together. It's like a pendulum swing on how the Jesuits use their intelligence agencies. And also, Steve Carell's wife. I know Steve Carell is a Roman Catholic, but his wife went to a Jesuit school.
Holy Cross?
Boston College. Let me pull up what's his wife's name?
Holy Cross Church is saying?
Oh, Nancy Carroll. Yo, Holy Cross?
I believe it's Holy Cross. It was Boston College or Holy Cross. One of those two. They're basically the same. However, we're talking about Steve Carell, who played Michael in the American version of The Office. Over in England, the original series starred, as I said, Ricky Gervais, who played Michael. Now, Ricky Gervais, technically speaking, has never been married, but he's been with his romantic partner, Jane Fallon, who's English, but she's of Irish Roman Catholic background. As a matter of fact, Jane Fallon, Ricky Gervais' de facto wife, went to St. Bernard's Convent School in Slough, Berkshire. So she went to a convent school in England. So the real spouses Roman Catholic and went to Catholic schools.
Okay, I wasn't aware of that with Gervais. We'll give him great
That's
information.
good stuff, George.
And with The Office, if you guys, one of the lead characters in The Office, Leslie David Baker, he plays Stanley. He's the black guy in The Office in the show. But he got a degree in psychology from Jesuit Loyola University in Chicago. And all these shows, if you look in the background, you'll find many Jesuit alumni within like another example is I know you mentioned how they use shows like Seinfeld and Curb Your Enthusiasm to give this false impression that there's like all these Jews running Hollywood. But I found one of the producers. I'm pretty sure this guy was a director too, but Andy Ackerman. Let me see. This was I think it was Boston College or the University of I think it was Santa Clara. Andy Ackerman was one of the lead producers behind Seinfeld and Curb Your Enthusiasm. And he went to Jesuit Santa Clara University, for instance. So you see, like they put all these Jews up front with Seinfeld and Curb Your Enthusiasm, but you have this Jesuit trained Andy Ackerman kind of in the shadows. And I wanted to mention to go back to Jack Ryan. He was like such an over the top case of this Jesuit theater. Like you mentioned, Johnny, he was recruited to the CIA by a Jesuit. The fictional name of the Jesuit who recruited the fictional Jack Ryan of the Tom Clancy series into the CIA. His name was Father Tom O'Reilly, professor at Georgetown. And like Jack Ryan, like even joined the Center for the CSIS think tank at Georgetown. It was just over the top when I just looked into this guy's background. Yeah, he did a brief stint. Jack Ryan, the fictional character, did a brief stint at the Center for Strategic and International Studies, which is one of the most powerful think tanks in the world, which I recommend people look at the list at this think tank. It's at Georgetown. That's where it was created. It was created in the thick of the Cold War. Like Henry Kissinger is a lifetime member there. Brenda Brzezinski was a lifetime member. A lot of people don't know Kissinger was a professor at Georgetown also in the late 70s.
That's
those who point out that Kissinger is like the big bad boogeyman who's controlling the U.S. Conveniently leave that out. But this Jack Ryan, you see, so this is like the merging of like real life and like Jesuit. They're openly flaunting their control into like their control of the military-industrial complex. They're basically bragging about it via this Jack Ryan character in the Tom Clancy series.
the office is created by B.J. Novak, who is Jewish, and yet it revolves around Catholics. Steve Carell, John Krasinski, and Jenna Fisher, who is the unrequited love interest that builds the suspense over time. She's also Catholic. She went to a good private all-girls Catholic school. And B.J. Novak, who was Jewish, his daddy, William Novak, is the ghostwriter behind memoirs, the autobiographies of Nancy Reagan, Magic Johnson, and Knight of Malta, Lee. I wiped the presidential limo clean, Iacocca. That's B.J. Novak's father, the ghostwriter of the memoirs of the Knight of Malta, who the FBI sent the Kennedy limo to have wiped clean of it.
Oh wow, fantastic information. It just proves that all of these shows, have connections to.
No, it's the Jews, Eric. It's the Jews. The Jews run everything. The Jews run everything, right? It's the Jews.
Well, yeah, but you would think, for an example, like the Shirley Povich. Well, like, who was the? You would think, for instance, the talk show host, like guys like Maury Povich, the longtime talk show host, had his brother who was his brother Shirley Povich, another Jew who was the sports writer at the Washington Post for 40 years. The Jesuits named their baseball field after him. Shirley Povich.
That was his father. That's Maury Povich's father, Shirley. Yeah.
Oh, it's his father.
Yeah.
But it's interesting though that the Jesuits are. It's interesting the Jesuits are naming their sports facilities after these the Jews. I don't know. It's just weird.
Hey, it's no different, George. I know George is trying to jump in, but it's no different than what we found on Noam Chomsky. They want information on the communism in South America, and so who do they go to? They don't go to the Catholic clergy that were directly involved in the revolutions. They go to the spotlight patsy Jew, Noam Chomsky.
Oh, absolutely, and the more that was a great column you put together, Johnny. Yeah, I recommend read that because he definitely is a patsy. I don't know if did you see the interview, Johnny? He gave. I'll try to pull this up and send it to you later today. But I thought it was telling. He did an interview talking about U.S. military affairs in South America, and he was talking about how like the U.S. military declared war on the Catholic Church, and the Catholic Church was so unfairly persecuted by the U.S. government, blah blah blah. And you can in this interview, like you just said, like he's propped up. It's kind of sad to just see how all these students are just like sucking up to Chomsky and just no one like he barely gets questioned in these environments, especially when there's students.
Was it you that found that he lived with the Jesuits?
Yeah, he did. That was in Nicaragua. Yeah, that's what we're right in like the height of the Sandinista movement. He was living with the Jesuits there. Yeah,
coincidence. Oh, and he's the one that said that his idol was Daniel Berrigan, S.J., right?
Yes, yeah, and actually, fantastic. The same Jesuit was the idol of Schmidt from The Intercept.
Yeah, Jeremy Scahill. Scahill, who was the bane of existence of Eric Prince, also devout, converted Roman Catholic, and the essence of war profiteering.
Johnny, I thought it was you pointed this out in Eaters of Children, but I thought it was interesting that Scahill, when he was branding Eric Prince, he was really hesitant to identify him as a Catholic. He was just calling him like a devout Christian.
Yes, no, he was.
That kind of reminded me of like a Voltaire-esque type of thing.
Yes, evangelical Christian. Good for you. And that's exactly what Voltaire did when he spent his whole entire life with the Jesuits. And some people think that he was an ordained Jesuit, but then he made a break, just like Weishaupt. He made a break from the Jesuits and he attacked them. The only problem is he slandered every crime that the Catholic Church and the Jesuits did and called them Christian, when in reality, the Christians were the victims of the crimes.
Absolutely. I think
Great
that
point.
was his way of muddying the waters at that time.
Absolutely.
And yeah, just Jeremy Scahill from the Intercept. Yeah, he's like a billionaire also, which is very suspicious. He's a billionaire with the Jesuit mentor Daniel Berrigan, S.J. Red flags that he's. And
Yeah,
I
no, no.
read some of the Intercept articles, and I can positively I think identify them as controlled opposition.
Yeah, good for you. Yeah, here he is. He's the bleeding heart, far left investigative journalist, and yet he's. I didn't know he was a billionaire. That's holy mackerel! What a fraud. He's also close with Glenn Greenwald, who is a uh, homosexual Jew and the chosen journalist behind the Snowden so-called revelations. He's Snowden's chosen boy there. So
Well, absolutely. Yeah, they
following him.
propped up. Like Snowden didn't disclose anything that was already disclosed in the 1975 Church Committee report, for instance. So like they propped up Snowden as this credible source, use guys like Greenwald to do that. And and Snowden, you mentioned this on a previous show. Like he shamelessly like propped up the official line on 9/11, which
Yeah.
shows that he's a plant, from all along. And he reached out to this Plato Chacharis, which I thought was very telling because Plato Chacharis is one of the most powerful maybe the most powerful attorney in D.C. Trained at Georgetown, he was Robert Philip Hansen's attorney, the Opus Dei devout Catholic FBI agent who was, giving the Soviets top U.S. military and technological secrets for over 25 years. But Hansen went to Plato Chacharis as well. And Chacharis has a long line of list of guys that he has served. Like Richard Alms was another CIA agent who was giving information to the Soviets, and he ran out to Plato Chacharis. So just on Snowden, they just shows that he was, a plant all along. And Greenwald, it's really like surface level information. I think people who think Glenn Greenwald is like exposing things are people who aren't really well read. And Greenwald never ever takes it to the Vatican. I've never heard him say the word. He'll never ever go to that level. But you'll never hear Greenwald say the word Jesuit, for instance, or Knights of Malta. He's in a controlled pocket. He is able to expose the FBI every now and then. Write a bit about like the surveillance state, but he has a very controlled bubble that he has to stay in.
Well, excuse me, do you mind if I jump in? A couple things about Tom Clancy. I know it's off topic, but also he was part owner of the Baltimore Orioles. And I only mention that because that's another to bread and circuses. And when people talk about Tom Clancy, they always think about his, spy novels, Jack Ryan, and things like that. So, how many of these figures, like the late Tom Clancy, were involved with other things that most people don't even pay attention to? Now, speaking of Tom Clancy and Jack Ryan, we started out the show we were talking about Annie Jacobson, who wrote a book back in 2014 called Operation Barbarossa, the secret intelligence program that's brought. Now, according to definitive 570-page footnote.
Oh, you're cutting it out a bit there, George.
George.
Pages long. However, she does talk about Reinhard Gehlen, William J. Donovan, Chloe, but she does not mention that any of the Knights of Malta and that Donovan, the Jesuits. She does not mention anything about Karol Wojtyła, the future John Paul II, or Eugenio Cardo Bocelli, Pius XII, or Montini, Giovanni Montini, the future Paul VI. She does not talk about Edmund Walsh. So she never made, Eric was saying, she doesn't mention along those lines. He does second period. So that's a huge oversight. Now, Jacobson has also done works. She wrote a book back in 2011 on Area 51, and that was supposed to have been how she got her name on the map. And oops. Now, I looked up Annie Jacobson. She was born in 1967, and she was born in Connecticut, Middletown. Middletown. She went to school. She at Princeton, and I seem to be having some my tablet. I'll be with you in just a moment.
Oh, no worries. Yeah, George is mentioning Annie Jacobson, the author who wrote a recent book on paperclip in 2014, and it's being advertised as the most definitive book out there on paperclip. And there's some serious oversights in the book on connecting the Vatican to the Nazis and connecting the Vatican to the American military intelligence also, showing that they were, pulling the strings behind the whole operation. And George mentioned just the people didn't hear with George's audio there. Jacobson has no mention in her book of Reinhard Galen becoming a Knight of Malta. There's no mention of William Donovan, who was one of Donovan was leading paperclip as the head of the OSS. No mention on Donovan being a Knight of Malta, Knight of St. Sylvester. It doesn't mention how Catholic Walter Bedell Smith was. I'm sure no mention of the Jesuit priest Avery Dulles. No mention of all the declassified files that were disclosed in the Nazi War Crime Disclosure Act in 2007. In those files, it's shown that Alan Dulles was actually meeting with Heinrich Himmler in Switzerland, plotting Operation Paperclip. Dulles had a nephew who was a Jesuit priest, and Heinrich Himmler officially modeled his SS off the Jesuit order. So there's some serious oversights in the Jacobson book. No mention of Karl Lueger, the super Catholic mayor of Vienna who gave Hitler his anti-Semitism. No mention of Franz von Papen, really. I know George mentioned that to me. The papal chamberlain, who is Hitler's vice chancellor. So so I think George. I think he lagged out of the chat. He'll be back in shortly. But George was just saying before we went live how he was felt very confident in saying that Annie Jacobson is a gatekeeper for the Vatican, and it gives very plausible. It gives the Vatican plausible deniability because Jacobson has no connections to Rome on the surface. I think she went to Princeton and an Episcopal high school. And for the Vatican, they're able to say, here's some neutral scholarship on Operation Paperclip that shows that we had nothing to do with everything that went down. I think that's the angle that they went with this Jacobson book. I haven't read it, just from what George was telling me about it.
I'm convinced, Eric, that just to get published, you're a gatekeeper. Just to get published. I don't know of any major work that seriously handles our level of information. You really don't get this information anywhere else. They're all in order to get published, you have to be a gatekeeper.
I agree, John. Even H.G. Wells, had a hard time getting his Crux Ansata published, even in 1943. And H.G. Wells is the founder of one of the pioneers of modern science fiction. He was everywhere. And even a guy with his name as recognizable as H.G. Wells couldn't get his book published. So if H.G. Wells can't get his book published on the Catholic Church, how are you going to think someone who isn't an international celebrity is going to pan out?
Absolutely. You mentioned Walter Bedell Smith, Army General. Few people realize that he was the first. So you have Knight of Malta, William Donovan, aka they like to call him Wild Bill. I don't ever call him that. Trader Bill, I like to call him. Was the founder and creator of the OSS, but the very first director of the Catholic Intelligence Agency was devout Roman Catholic Army General Walter Bedell Smith. They're like bookends. William Donovan into Walter Bedell Smith.
Yeah, then
And then
Bedell
the
Smith
number.
into Dulles. Dulles was, if not officially, I think officially he was a Presbyterian, but he was doubtlessly a secret Catholic.
Here's another good example. You mentioned you have I grabbed the book that you have, the autobiography of the memoirs of Reinhard Gehlen. Also, Gatekeeper is his editor that wrote the preface touted Dulles as good, particularly John Foster Dulles, as good Protestants, the sons of a Protestant preacher. Didn't mention anything about John Foster Dulles's Jesuit offspring, who ended up, Avery Dulles ended up being one of the most powerful Jesuits anywhere in America.
Yeah, he
So,
was a Cardinal of Fordham professor for like 20 years.
yeah, you're not going to get a book on Reinhard Gehlen unless it's been thoroughly cleared.
Although, yeah, and the Galen book, that book was called The Service. It was a very watered down book, but there was one section where I think Galen slipped up or admitted like a truth, and that was on how the U.S. did absolutely nothing to stop Fidel Castro from coming to power. And Galen actually says the reason for that was because of Castro's Jesuit schooling. He said that was really the only reason. And he talks about how like the U.S. gave no aid to Batista. Batista, didn't. He ended up going to Franco's Spain and Salazar's Portugal, two devout Catholic fascists. So Batista didn't have it tough by no means, but the U.S. did absolutely nothing to help him. No military aid whatsoever. And Galen pointed that out in his book. I think that was I don't know if that was a slip up from the editors or he just wanted to put a little bit of truth in there for his own sake, like for his own conscience. But I thought that was an interesting admission, to say the least, because it's true. Like the U.S. did absolutely nothing to prevent Castro from coming to power. And then like the guy who led the Bay of Pigs invasion, Manuel R. Time, was literally recruited to the CIA by a Jesuit priest. The source I found, the Jesuit priest was unnamed. But just like Jack Ryan, Manuel R. Time was recruited to the CIA by a Jesuit priest. So they had a Jesuit-trained guy leading the Bay of Pigs, which was ultimately designed to fail, keep Castro in power. And then they sent Jesuit-trained James Donovan, trained at Fordham, down to Cuba to negotiate with Castro after the botched Bay of Pigs. So the whole thing was, Jesuit ties. So Galen, did admit that in his book, which I thought was, interesting. But 3/4 of the book is him just, going on about the communists. Oh, we got to get the communists here. We got to get the communists here.
Well, yeah, and they have things.
The book. I don't know if I sent you this book. The memoirs of Robert. I put these on my archive.org page. It's called the Robert Daniel Murphy's memoirs. Are also a great read that I recommend. He does he does his typical papal gatekeeping there and there, but there are quite a few admissions in that book that are, startling and shocking, to say the least. Like that admission about that, like we covered this on the last show, like how he admitted that George Patton told him about the plan to drive onto Moscow to crush the Soviets, and how Murphy said, like, I won't allow you to do this. This is insane. Which we, theorized ultimately led to Patton's demise. And then they had the papist, John Daly, trained at Boston College, leading the media crusade against Patton slapping a soldier, for instance. There's like that Robert D. Murphy book. There's an excerpt where he's talking to a Soviet charge d'affaires. I think his last name was Bodanganov. But the Soviet official is asking Murphy, says that the Soviets want to increase relations to the Vatican. And Murphy recommends that they sign a concordat with them, for instance. All sorts of interesting revelations like that. But yeah, ultimately, just going back to your original point, though, Johnny, if you want to jump in if you want, but ultimately, people got to realize that big booksellers are controlled heavily. Like the Catholic pressure is a real thing. You know, Aber Manhattan documented this in the 50s. Like the New York Times had to publicly apologize to the Catholic Church in the 50s for criticizing them. Fox had to do the same thing in the 50s, for instance. Like these big companies actually had to publicly apologize for doing journalism.
I found Jesuit, what we call Jesuit breadcrumbs, connected to. I have a dossier on the publishers: Alfred Regnery, Ernest Hemingway, Eugene O'Neill, Gilbert Keith G.K. Chesterton, Michael Henry DeYoung Tobin, Saul Bellow, Chicago Jew, connected with the Jesuits in Chicago, Will Durant. Just a big name authors and or publishers that are all connected to the Catholic Church, and that's
I found one recently. I think is Hubert Peter Morrison. Let me pull this up. His company, his British company held the rights to the new international version of the Bible, I believe. Let me pull that up here. This was a big publisher I found here. Hubert. Oh, here it is. I got a lot of posts on my right. Oh yeah, so Dr. H. Peter Morrison. He was a Protestant publisher, but he was knighted as a Knight of St. Gregory the Great in 1965, and his company was what was it here? He was president of the Thomas Nelson and Sons company, Thomas Nelson and Sons, and they held the British copyright of the Revised Standard Version of the Bible.
Oh, wait. Maybe that's why Thomas Nelson Publishers told me that in response to my question, would they want to publish Illuminati Unmasked? And they finally got back to me and said, if I pay them $5,000, they'll get it published for me. I was like, are you kidding me? Isn't it the other way around? Aren't you supposed to pay me? Why am I paying you $5,000 to publish my friggin' book?
Yeah,
if I had $5,000 sitting around, I wouldn't need you. Clowns.
Honestly, and just great information. And with these guys, giving this knighthood to Dr. Morrison, I bet there is no guarantee that they would have even published Illuminati Unmasked if they read the whole manuscript.
Oh, they would have butchered it. They would have changed just a massive amount.
They would say, "Oh, Johnny, you're being do you really mean to criticize the Vatican? Like, do you really mean it? Like, come on, you're being a little hard on them, don't you think?" That's probably what they would.
I dealt with a lawyer in an attempt to strike back at the entrapment that was done by YouTube, and the bane of false flags, Lenny Posner, that clown, that Jewish patsy clown from Sandy Hook, who was viciously attacked me and my family. And I talked to a lawyer and showed the lawyer some of the stuff I do on my blog. And the lawyer said, "Hey, there's a great example. You just can't say this stuff." I was like, "What the?" I almost cursed here. What the F do I need you for? I could just take everything down myself without you saying it. She said, "Well, you can't say stuff like, was it 360? What's the CNN anchor?
Anderson Cooper.
Anderson Cooper. You can't say Anderson Cooper is connected to the CIA." I said, actually, he's the one that said that. He admitted.
He admitted it on an interview. I've seen that.
Yes, he admitted that he had an internship with the CIA. That's not me saying that. Every time I make a controversial statement, I have an accepted source. That's him saying that. And she just said, "Well, I can't help you." I bet you can't help me. As soon as these people get exposed to the truth, they run and hide.
Oh, absolutely. And honestly, it's getting to the point with the police state where if you tell like a lawyer like you're doing some research like this, like you could possibly get your house raided. I mentioned that because there's William Whitehead. I think this guy is controlled opposition because Ron Paul wrote the preface to his book. I was reading his book called Battlefield America, just a book on kind of like the police state measures since like 1960. But there was a case in Massachusetts where this guy was posting a Facebook post. He was making anti-Obama Facebook posts. And this guy was also a 9/11 truther. That's how William Whitehead described him. So he was posting stuff about 9/11 being an inside job, and he was actually detained by like Homeland Security because they said he was like a domestic terrorist. And actually, no, Johnny, like I was reading this Janet Napolitano. This is with credit to William Whitehead, the author. He mentioned how Janet Napolitano, Jesuit. He didn't mention this though. Jesuit trained Janet Napolitano at Santa Clara. But in 2005, she issued a memo on, quote, right-wing extremists. And according to her, Johnny, you're an extremist, right-wing extremist, because she basically said that all veterans coming back from overseas are right-wing extremists.
Yeah, that's
basically what Janet Napolitano said.
Yeah, I've seen that. That's of course, you'll get sources like Night of Malta, Rupert Murdoch's Fox News to talk about that, but they won't ever mention how they're all on the same side.
Oh, absolutely. Actually, Rupert Murdoch. I'll link these quotes. I found the quotes where Rupert Murdoch says that News Corp and the Jesuits are the same.
Oh, good for you.
Very similar. Actually, I found another. I think I sent you guys this. I was watching a Fox segment this morning, and just this commentator came on who was just in particularly like outrageous, just interjecting like this racial dialogue. What was this name? What was this woman here?
Ebony something or other.
Yeah, Eleni Williams. I want to pull that up, but yeah, she was very plugged in. That's why I was just surprised. I wasn't expecting her to be as plugged in as Ebony Kiwani Williams. Yeah, so she was on Fox. So while she was on Fox, she was on.
Check test. Check test.
Eric?
George, I got you. I can't. We lost Eric.
Boy, I have no idea. Last quarter of an hour trying to fix the problem. Well.
Yeah, you're still in and out, but I am picking you up.
Boy, I hope we can, because I have a ton to give, and some of it actually may be good.
I'm sure it's all good. We just have to get it out there.
So forgive me if I hope, and forgive me if I repeat myself, but what I was trying to say 15, 20 minutes ago is we're talking about this author, Ann Jacobson. She's 7. Town, Connecticut, I believe. And now I'm not sure if there's any significance to that, but she went to the Episcopalian school, St. Paul's Episcopal School, which is a prep in Connecticut. And she ended up getting her undergrad degree from Princeton. So her background is ostensibly Protestant. She was a reporter for years for LA Times magazine. And as I said, she wrote this book on paperclip back in 2014. Before that, she wrote a book on Area 51 in 2011. So she seems to obviously have this like AM coast to coast.
Yeah, her background does not sound Protestant, George. It sounds secular. Princeton may have been founded as a Protestant university, but it's never really been that. So I would call her secular and not necessarily Protestant.
Oh, okay. Well, fair. Well, okay, non-Catholic.
Sure.
I looked up information on her husband. She is married. She has 2 kids. I was not able to find anything about that. I was not able to find anything about her parents or siblings or anything along those lines. And I did. I'm trying to do all my due diligence, like that. Holy Cross, Boston. However, is I just got an email from Eric. He said his power went out.
We're crying out loud.
Anyhow, she has appeared at the Commonwealth Club. As a matter of fact, she was there maybe a month or 2 ago. Now, the Commonwealth Club is in San Francisco, which is, among other things, is the home of the University of San Francisco, the Bohemian Club, all sorts of things. Anyhow, the current president and CEO of the Commonwealth Club is Gloria Duffy, who got her PhD from the University of San Francisco. The Commonwealth Club was founded in 1904, the same year as what would become Bank of America. It was originally called, as you said, Bank of Italy or Banca d'Italia, by Amedeo Giannini. One of the other was James Phelan, who would later. And Phelan was Irish Roman Catholic, and he went to Ignatius College, which he later renamed, is also currently the producer and one of the writers for Jack Ryan, Amazon.com, which is, I guess, the latest incarnation of the Tom Clancy series. So, regarding Jacobson, I think since she's worked so well with the machine for years, being a gatekeeper on paperclip, on Area 51, things like that, they said, you know what, Annie, as a token of our appreciation, we'll let you work on the show, Jack Ryan. So it could have been a similar situation to what they did with somebody like John Daly. As I said before, he was the original host of What's My Line. But before